Hello out there, everybody. On YouTube. So I took my Steam Deck to Japan. If you've been wondering where I've been for a while, well, I went to Japan on a little family vacation for about 2 weeks, and it was great. And I took my Steam Deck with me, like I told you, and thought I'd tell you about it, how it went for me, all that good stuff. So what's my motivation for this? Well, basically, there's a little bit of backstory, some history on this. So the Steam Deck was actually gifted to me for Christmas by my wife, and she told me that her motivation was that I was originally planning on taking my laptop with me, which is a Dell XPS 13. But I was concerned about it because, it's my laptop. It's got a lot of personal stuff on there, private stuff on there, my stuff for my servers that I run, etc., etc. And I basically didn't want to risk taking it and getting it potentially damaged or whatever happening to it. And so I kind of wanted to find a different solution. And my wife came up with, well, you want to play some games and kill time on the very long flight we have ahead of us, so maybe let's get him a console. And she found the Steam Deck because the Steam Deck was also a computer and could double as a PC, and therefore could potentially replace or whatever, augment my laptop. And so I was able to. The idea was that I was going to take this Steam Deck with me from the very beginning. Now I didn't see this coming. I was completely surprised by it. It was an amazing thing to happen. Because I had no clue it was going to happen this way, and I was still thinking, yeah, I'm totally going to have to risk taking my laptop with me. But no such thing. I ended up with a Steam Deck instead. So from the very beginning of me owning the Steam Deck, I was pretty much operating under the idea that I was going to be taking this thing on this trip with me. And so in order to better understand what I needed to do, some of the hurdles I might come across, some of the issues that might crop up, I thought it might be fun to, or maybe just a good idea, to sort of research what other people do while traveling with their consoles. And I found videos where people took their consoles to Japan specifically. And those were particularly interesting to me because I wanted to know if there was any hurdles about getting it, maybe into the country, because I've never actually been outside of my country before this particular trip. And so I was pretty curious about how things like that went. Spoiler alert, it was uneventful and I managed to get in just fine. But, that's a different thing. But I did a bunch of research and I found a bunch of videos, and the videos that I found tended to be quite naysayer about it. They were kind of down on the idea of taking a Steam Deck with them. They, tried it and said, well, they didn't like it for whatever reason, or they think maybe there was a better way to do it, or I don't know. And I feel like my experience differed from their experience considerably. And so I thought it might be a good idea to talk about my experience and just share my story. And if you're planning on taking a trip, to Japan or maybe some other country, you might be interested to understand kind of what I went through and my experiences, because I have some tips and tricks and things that I might show you that could come in handy if you're planning on doing something like this. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about here is packing tips. So in my case, my family actually bought me a carrying case for the Steam Deck. So my wife got me the deck itself, and then my in-laws bought me a carrying case for it. And my wife initially kind of felt bad about that because she sort of, I think, gave them the idea to do that maybe, not realizing that the Steam Deck actually comes with a case. But in retrospect, I'm actually really, really glad they bought me the case, because while I love the Steam Deck carrying case, the Steam Deck carrying case has what I would consider a bit of a design flaw in my opinion. And also the Steam Deck carrier case is kind of clearly marked with a Steam Valve logo and everything on it, which makes it stick out a little bit. It kind of lets you know what's in the case. And to me, I think it's better to, if you're trying to, travel to a different country or, anywhere where, you're not wholly confident that your Steam Deck's not going to go missing or something, it's nicer if it's in a case that's less conspicuous. Now, obviously, if people know what they're looking for and they see a case of about Steam Deck size, it is what it is at that point. But to me, I think it was important to have something that was a little more incognito than the, Steam case that shipped with it. Having said that, though, the Steam case that does ship with it, I do like that case. It's not like I don't like that case, but I think the case that I did get is a little bit better than the one that comes with it by default, for a couple of reasons. So basically, the original case that shipped with it has like this divot on the back of the case that makes it a little bit weird in my opinion. You can fit the carrier, so you get like this little baggie and you can put your charger in the bag, and then you can put the bag inside this little divot in the back and still carry it. But it makes a lot more sense to me if that divot were inverted and like behind the deck with like a flap that you could put down, such as the way my other carrying case does it. It's better that way in my opinion. Also, interestingly, on the default case, there's this little ribbon, and I watched a review of a guy who's apparently getting rid of his Steam Deck because of stupid reasons that I'm not going to go into. Usually, when people decide they're going to get rid of their deck and they make videos about it, it's always because they don't tend to understand the power that they're holding in their hands. But beyond that, basically, he was going on about how the little ribbon thing in the case, he didn't understand what to do with it. The ribbon thing in the case is so that you can put your Steam Deck on top of the ribbon, and you can use the ribbon as a tab to pull the Steam Deck out of the case without having to, like, dig your fingers around it or whatever and try to pull it out that way. It's just an easy way to get the Steam Deck out of the box or the case. So anyway, beyond all that, though, there's a couple of other things that I would recommend you do. One is get an external battery for your Steam Deck, and I put it in the little divot inside the carrying case and just put it in there because it happened to be the exact perfect size to go in there. And then I put the little cable that comes with it in the little Steam Deck bag that came with my actual Steam Deck, and I put that in the slot with the charger, and those two things in there fit absolutely perfectly. And then I was able to put the little flap down and then put the Steam Deck on top, and then put the other flap down on top of the Steam Deck, and then close the Steam Deck case up that way. And that made for a really, really interesting and kind of good situation, I think. Another thing I did was I bought a Samsung tracker tag and slipped that inside this little pouch on the front of my Steam Deck's case in order to sort of, keep tabs on my Steam Deck, know where it was. If it got lost, if it got left behind somewhere, I could easily find it. If somebody ran off with it, I knew who to go find and punch, that kind of thing. So, it was I thought it was a good idea. Ultimately, of course, if somebody takes your Steam Deck out of the case, that's thwarted. The ultimate idea for that, I think, is to actually take the Steam Deck apart and put the Samsung tag or whatever inside the Steam Deck itself physically. I've seen people glue them inside the handles on their Steam Deck because there's apparently a lot of extra room in there, and you can maybe fit either an Apple Air tag or possibly a Samsung tag in there. Samsung tags are kind of big, though, so I'm kind of curious if that's going to actually fit, but it's something I'm looking at doing. Apart from that, I brought a 100-watt charger. Now, interestingly, in Japan, the outlets there are actually rather compatible with American standard outlets. So if you're coming from America and you have an American plug, chances are you'll be okay as long as that plug does not include a ground wire. If your plug is 3-prong and has the ground wire, it's not going to work because plugs in Japan are only 2-prong. Apparently, they don't believe in grounding stuff. I don't know. I don't know how their plugs work, but 2-prong is what it is. Their plugs, I think, also output only 100 volts, so you need that on your. You need to be able to handle that with your device. Fortunately, my charger is exactly within those specifications and worked absolutely perfectly. It also has a second plug on it so that I could USB plug in like a phone, and then I had a little extra thing that I plugged into that would charge my phone, my earbuds, and my watch all together. So I was able to charge my Steam Deck, watch, phone, and battery and my earbuds at the same time at various hotels and things, and it worked out fine. Battery life, on the other hand, is a complaint that I hear a lot. Like every video that I watch about the Steam Deck, the number one things people complain about are the battery life and probably the screen. That's like the number one things. I always hear battery life and screen. And I mean, I get it, but I don't get it, right? Like, I don't think it's news. Like, I knew what I was getting into when I got the Steam Deck. As soon as my wife handed it to me, I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. The battery's going to suck, though, because of course it is. I mean, it's a Steam Deck. It's an x86 processor in a handheld console. That's a recipe for battery disaster. There is no way around that, right? The reason why the Nintendo Switch lasts so long is because it's not using an x86 processor. It's basically an Android tablet, more or less, right? And so, realistically, that's what you're up against. And unless you could switch to a different architecture that's more power efficient, that's forever going to be a problem. And that's going to be that same problem with any device that does this, right? the Asus ROG, the Aya Neo, they're all going to have the same issues. No way around it. And it's interesting to me that arguably it's always the people who are complaining about the battery life that are also complaining about performance on the device. But those two things go hand in hand. If you increase the performance, you also increase heat output and battery drain. Because of course you do. And if you increase the battery in order to compensate for that, you increase further heat output and the weight of the console. Because of course you do. So unless battery technology takes huge leaps and bounds, or we figure out how to charge things wirelessly somehow, where I don't know. But the point is, battery life is going to continue to be an issue on newer consoles for the foreseeable future. It just is. The only way to really get around it is to maybe go the route Apple is and go with ARM processors or something. And then you end up sacrificing compatibility, which you're already running Linux here, so maybe don't sacrifice compatibility any more than you already are, you know? But I know that sounds like I'm defending the battery, and I'm not. I recognize that there's an issue there, because of course there is. I just don't understand why people complain about it as much as they do, right? And here's the interesting thing about the battery life, okay? So the battery life on the Steam Deck is very much up to the user, right? So what I mean by that is, if you come at your Steam Deck from an I want to play this specific game, and that specific game that you're trying to play is something very graphically high and intense, like Cyberpunk or The Witcher 3 or any of the Tomb Raider games, the new Tomb Raider games anyway, you know, the Batman series games, anything that's going to be higher power draw like that is going to murder your battery. Your Steam Deck will basically go down to maybe an hour, hour and a half if you're playing some of those games, right? Whereas if you're being a little bit more battery cautious, for instance, disabling Wi-Fi adapters if you're not using them, disabling your Bluetooth if you're not using them, managing your screen brightness when you don't need the screen to be maxed out brightness, and you play games that are not as graphically intensive, maybe stick to emulators, maybe play Celeste, Shovel Knight, Terraria, those kinds of things, Super Meat Boy, stuff like that, then your battery life will go much, much further. Maybe even, you know, upwards of like 4.5 hours. I don't exactly know, for reasons I'll get into in a minute, but my point is you can do things to extend your battery life. You just have to not be so picky about what you're doing. You have to have an open mind and remain flexible to your situation. If you know you need 4 hours of battery life, don't play a game that's going to eat your battery life in an hour. That's just stupid, right? The other thing you can do is, like I showed you in the beginning of the video, get a power adapter. Now, interestingly, with the power adapters, don't get too greedy with those either, because you need to keep those under 100 watts, or technically they're not supposed to get on the plane with you. And that's an interesting, you know, thing that, you know, basically I ran into was I did not break the rules. I brought a 65 watt power adapter, 65 watt hour power adapter, right? And so, I think that's what it was. Anyway, the point is it wasn't a 100 watt hour capacity battery, right? And so with that, I was able to take it on the plane whether they looked at it or not. But interestingly, I don't know if it's because I was TSA pre-checked or because, you know, privilege, or I don't know, but they did not seem to check for me. I don't know if maybe their scanners auto-check somehow. I don't know, but nobody asked any questions. Nobody seemed to care. Nobody seemed to check. Whether that means you should risk it, I don't think so, because if they do catch you with a battery that's not supposed to fly and they decide to enforce the rules, they confiscate your battery or they prevent you from getting on the plane. And of the two of those things, losing your plane ticket is probably more expensive. So that's up to you, man. You know, however you want to handle it. But I personally would just abide by the rules. It's what I did, and it worked out well for me. But even with that battery backup, okay, you're still looking at maybe buying yourself another 4 hours, right? Tops, okay? And where I was coming from was actually Atlanta. Now, I don't live in Atlanta. That was my layover, but I flew from Atlanta basically direct to Japan when I got there. And that, I don't know if you know this, is on the other side of Earth. So it's about 13 hours of flying. And if you do the math, if you go 4.5 hours for the Steam Deck, we'll argue 4 just for the sake of argument. You know, we'll say 4. And then if you go another 4 for the battery backup, you're still only looking at about 8 hours, right? That's not the full trip. Obviously, there's a problem there. So there's a couple of things you can do. The other thing you can do is you can just get a second battery. That works if you really need to. But in my case, battery life was not even a thought that I had. Didn't have to worry about it. I played whatever game I wanted, and I didn't worry about battery life at all. I was able to play any game. Tomb Raider, Half-Life, well, not Half-Life. Half-Life's not terribly demanding anymore. Cyberpunk, games like Batman Arkham City. I played The Witcher 3, Tales of Vesperia. That's not particularly demanding, but I played it. Octopath Traveler. Any game I basically wanted to play, I was able to play without any issue and without any concern for my battery. And when I got off the plane, I had a full battery. Now, how did I pull off such a feat? Well, I don't know about other flights, but I flew Delta, and I flew in Comfort Plus. And in Comfort Plus, they have outlets. Like, not USB plugs, but like real outlets. And I was able to take my 100-watt power adapter and plug it into the outlet, and then plug the other end into my Steam Deck. And then I didn't care about the battery life of the Steam Deck at all. It just wasn't a factor. I played whatever I want, streamed whatever I want, did whatever I want, and had no consequences. So, yeah, battery life is bad, but how many times in your life are you really that far from an outlet? Right? At the airport, at every terminal gate that there was, there were outlets everywhere. Everywhere. It was so rare that I actually needed to use my battery backup solution that I almost didn't need to bring it on the trip with me. It was pretty much pointless. Like, it was basically just extra weight that I was carrying around for almost no reason. Basically. I used it, I can count the number of times I actually used it on one hand. And I was there for 2 weeks. And on 13-hour flights. So, make of that what you will, but personally, I don't think the battery issue is as big of an issue as people make it out to be. I just really don't. I didn't have a problem with it at all. Even on the trains, not the normal inner city trains, but those you're not going to be on super long anyway, so your Steam Deck should last that period of time. But like if you get on the Shinkansen and go from, Tokyo to Kyoto, it's not that bad. They have outlets, and the battery backup would have more than covered the trip. It was fine. Actually, I think I didn't go all the way to Kyoto. I went from Tokyo to Hakone, and then from Hakone to Kyoto another day. So technically, I split it up that way. But depending on what you're doing, your Steam Deck plus battery backup should get you wherever you need to go. And regardless of any of that, you also have outlets. There were outlets on some of the trains. So, I mean, is it an issue? Sure. Is it a big issue? No. Does it really impact you? I would argue not really. Maybe if you're going to a country that doesn't have outlets everywhere, it's an issue. But, Japan has tons of outlets. They call them kansinto. That's the Japanese word for outlet. But they're everywhere, and you're fine. Console size. So, console size. This is a weird one. People complained about the size of the console, and to me that didn't make sense at all. Like, I don't understand the complaint at all. Like, one person was saying, oh well, it's almost as big as a laptop, so why not just bring a laptop? Well, let me explain something to you, okay? It's not almost as big as a laptop, not even close. Okay, it's almost as big as my Dell XPS 13, maybe, if you only look at it in 2 dimensions, right? Because it's a little bit thicker and it's almost as wide. So I guess you could say it's almost as big as the laptop, sure. But the reality of the situation is that it's still, like, there's still a whole other dimension, length to talk about, and the laptop has definitely got to be there by, like, double. And it's a 13-inch tiny little laptop without a GPU in it, right? If you want to bring a laptop that you can actually game on, you're going to need a 15-inch laptop or a 17-inch laptop, because most gaming laptops are going to be that big. And spoiler alert, that's bigger than a Steam Deck by a lot. Those things are huge. And Dell XPS 13, by the way, cost me, when I bought it new, about $2,300 roughly dollars. Okay, it's a 4-core system with 32 gigs of RAM. It is absolutely as maxed out as an XPS 13 could get at the time. It's a very expensive machine. Losing or damaging that would kill me, right? That would be awful. A Steam Deck, on the other hand, was about $600 for the top end model, right? And that's still a lot of money, mind you. I agree. And I would be devastated if I lost my Steam Deck just because of the sheer amount of work that I put into making it all custom and pretty. But is it $2,300? No, not even close, right? Even with all the accessories I have for my Steam Deck, it's still a fraction of the price of the Dell XPS 13 over there, right? So, I mean, I don't get the argument. I really don't. I think that's just splitting hairs. Let's look at it this way, okay? Most people compare the Steam Deck and the Nintendo Switch. I don't know why they do that either, because technically I believe those serve completely different markets and are not competitors, but fine, let's compare them. Is the Nintendo Switch smaller than a Steam Deck? Yes. Is it considerably smaller than a Steam Deck? Yes. Does it matter? No. Why? It doesn't really change how you're carrying your console around. The Steam Deck is not that heavy or that much bigger that it's going to matter. But the Steam Deck is in what I consider a sweet spot, whereas the Nintendo Switch is not in a sweet spot. What do I mean by this? Well, I can game on the Steam Deck for 5 hours and not feel fatigued and uncomfortable because the Steam Deck is ergonomic and comfortable to hold. Gaming on a Nintendo Switch in its portable mode with a Joy-Con side rail attached like that is not comfortable. In fact, I would say the only thing that's uncomfortable about the Steam Deck is it's a little bit heavier than a Nintendo Switch. And so if you're not careful and you're holding it wrong or you're holding it, out in front of you too much or whatever, then your arms might get a little tired. That's really it. That's the big mystery. But if you're smart about it and, you kind of put it on your knee or something and kick your leg up or, hold it at an angle or whatever where it's not constantly putting so much pressure on your arms, it's not really that bad. Is it ideal? No, but it's better than the Switch. It's more comfortable, more ergonomic. Like, when I game on the Nintendo Switch, I game on the Nintendo Switch almost exclusively docked to a TV and almost exclusively with a Pro Controller. Because the Joy-Cons are awful. They're awful when they're docked to the Switch, and they're awful when they're docked in that little caddy thing that you get that makes them a real controller, if you can call it that. And that's just the reality of it. The size of the Nintendo Switch does have a downside to it. And really not much of an upside. Because again, the size of it doesn't really make it that much more portable. It's not such a difference in size that you're changing how you're carrying it. It's not going to fit in your pocket. It's not going to fit in a small little teeny tiny case. You're going to put it in like a go bag or a laptop bag, just like you would anything else, and fit it under the seat in front of you with the rest of the crap you want on the plane with you. That's what you're going to do. So what does it matter? The Steam Deck fit underneath the seat in front of me with all the other stuff I was carrying just fine. I was not hindered by the size of the console in any way. So what's the point? And the same person basically argued, why not just bring a Windows console or a Windows laptop with you and game on that instead? Like you don't need a mouse and keyboard, or a mouse at the very least, a mouse and a controller to achieve the same kind of gaming experience you would get with just a Steam Deck. Because if you want to game seriously on a laptop, you need a mouse or you need a controller. Trying to do it with a trackpad is not fun. Now, if you want to play like Civilization or maybe The Sims, where you can constantly pause the game and reaction times aren't a big deal, sure, the trackpad's probably fine for that. But if you're playing a Twitch shooter, like, any of the Call of Duty series on a Windows laptop, or you're playing, an RTS, anything that requires speedy reaction times, the trackpad is not the best option, right? And a mouse and keyboard is much better. So at the very least, you're going to need a mouse, which means you're going to need somewhere to use the mouse, which not conducive to a plane, really. I mean, I guess you could unfold the system tray thing, or the little tray thing that they give you for food, and use your mouse on that if you really wanted to. But I would argue that's not very comfortable, because now you also have this honking laptop on top of there, so now you have this little teeny tiny space for your mouse. The Steam Deck is just better. So the next thing I heard people complain about was game DRM. And again, I did my homework. I installed all my games before I ever left. I tested them, made sure everything worked, and then got on the plane. Every game that I tried launched and ran perfectly. Every single one. But the point is, the DRM thing just didn't really impact me at all. I was able to launch everything I wanted to. And even if I didn't, even if I did run into games that had that problem, which again, I didn't, but even if I did, I had so many other games that I could play. I had games that I had installed from Good Old Games, which have no DRM at all in them. That's their whole thing. I had games that I have installed from other app stores like Epic. I have games that I have side-loaded on there. So like I have a boxed copy, real physical discs that I've made into ISOs that I then put on there and then hack them so I don't need the CD. Yeah. Interestingly, though, the Nintendo Switch did come in handy on my trip, even though I used it for all of about 30 minutes and it was basically dead weight the entire time. So when I was in the hotel, generally with the Steam Deck, I preach do not dock the Steam Deck because it's silly, right? If you're docking your Steam Deck, you wanted a PC. That's what you wanted. You bought a Steam Deck, but what you were looking for was a PC, right? A normal laptop or desktop. If you are docking a Steam Deck, you're doing it wrong. The Steam Deck is a handheld portable console. If you want to play your Steam Deck on a bigger TV, use Steam Link and cast it, and then keep your better controller that is your Steam Deck to yourself. Like, why would you give that up? It's crazy. So I never docked my Steam Deck. But when I was on my trip, I actually did dock my Steam Deck. Now, I will say that I do not have an official dock for the Steam Deck, and I've never bought a dock for the Steam Deck, so then how did I dock my Steam Deck? Well, I have a little dongle that I use, but it's not hypocritical because the dongle was not purchased for the Steam Deck. It was actually purchased for my Dell XPS 13, so I could plug that into TVs and monitors when I wanted to. So I just borrowed it so that if I was in a hotel and I wanted to hook my Steam Deck up to a hotel TV, I would be able to do that. In the future, I want to build a credit card size computer, maybe a Raspberry Pi or something, put a couple of network cards on it, and hook it up to an HDMI cable so I can use Steam Link, and then just cast my Steam Deck to the TV via that method, which I think would be much better. But until I complete that process, that's not a thing for me. So I had to dock it physically with an HDMI cable. And so what that meant was that I had to put the Steam Deck in a place that was close-ish to the TV. And so that meant that I couldn't just sit on the bed with my kids and watch TV. It meant that I had to constantly get up and go get the Steam Deck if I wanted to do things like change audio, switch episodes of a TV show or something that I was streaming through either Hulu or, HBO Max, or just Max now, I guess, Disney Plus, all those. So, it made it very frustrating for me because I wasn't able to remotely control my Steam Deck until I was. Because I remembered, oh yeah, I definitely have a Nintendo Switch in my bag and it's got Joy-Cons attached to the side of it and I can just pair those with my Steam Deck. And so I did, and then I had a remote control for my Steam Deck, and it was awesome, and it worked very, very well. For those of you who don't know, the Joy-Cons can pair with the Steam Deck, and you do get art for it, by the way, so the little layout thing in the menu system, it changes to show a Joy-Con. And if your Joy-Con if you just pair the one Joy-Con, then it will behave as though it's a halvesy controller like the Nintendo Joy-Con would be expected to behave. And if you pair both, then you get both together. I'm actually not sure if you can get pair both and then have them both act as independent halvesy controllers. I don't know the answer to that. I suspect you can possibly do it, but I didn't actually try it, so I don't know. But I know if you only pair one, then you can get the halvesy, which is kind of cool. But I paired both, and then I was able to do things like play video games with my Joy-Cons on the deck remotely, so that I could also distribute them to my family and let them play multiplayer with me, that sort of thing. It was pretty cool. Lastly, I want to talk about Windows. So people say, why not just bring a Windows laptop? Well, here's the thing, guys. The Steam Deck can run Windows if you really want to do that, right? You can install Windows on your Steam Deck. You can either install it as the only operating system if you are actually crazy, Or you can dual boot it off of your memory card if you're just a little bit crazy. Or you can use a thumb drive if you're, slightly... That's probably the most sane way to do it, probably, is to just boot it off of a thumb drive, in my opinion. And the reason being is that you can only get about a terabyte of storage if you use a little memory card. And if you put Windows on there, then you're giving up part of that terabyte to Windows. So if you want to play something like Call of Duty, which is pretty much why you should run Windows, is if you want to play Call of Duty, which I would argue don't do. Just buy a PlayStation and play it when you're in front of that. Call of Duty takes up like 150 gigabytes of storage all by itself, right? That game is ridiculously big. And on a console with limited storage as it is that really what you want on there? That plus an entire installation of Windows just so you can play the thing? I would argue, nope. No, it's not. It's not something I want to do. Just my 2 cents. I personally wouldn't. Somebody once asked me what would happen if a game came out that I wanted to run on Windows, but it was only for Windows, right? I can't do it on Linux no matter what I try. And I said, I wouldn't buy the game. And they're like, but you want to. It's a game you really want. And I said, there is no game that I really want so badly that I would give up my privacy, my security, my workflow, and my ability to customize my operating system to my heart's content just so that I can play that game on Windows. Like, why would I ever do that? That's stupid, right? Like, that's why I bought a PlayStation, so that any game that was too dumb for me to be able to play on Linux, I could play on my PlayStation. That's the whole point of the PlayStation. Without that, the PlayStation has literally no use for me. It's completely stupid to have, because I prefer PC gaming to PlayStation gaming 1000%. And for everybody who goes, but you can play so many more games, more of your library will be compatible. Here's the interesting thing about my Steam library, guys. I have a library in Steam with literally hundreds of games. I have hundreds of games on Steam. I have hundreds of games that are on my shelf back there that I played as a kid. I have hundreds of games on Goog. I have hundreds of games on many other platforms. Hundreds of games that are emulated. And 100% of those games work on Linux, because I've been using Linux for over 10 years now. Well over 10 years, in fact. Probably closer to 15, I'd say, in some form or fashion. And I've been using it professionally, like at my job, for a very long time. So the whole idea that Windows is going to give me some sort of game compatibility that I don't already have is just not true. There is no game that I'm interested in playing that I would give up Linux to play. It's just not the case for me. And there are people out there who will say, well, you just run Linux because, it's free, and you want a free operating system you don't have to pay for. That's not true. I actually have a legit version of every single Windows operating system that has ever released, up to and including Windows 11, by the way. It comes that way. That's what happens when you're in the tech industry, right? I have legit versions of Mac. I have a Mac in my house. I don't use it for my personal life. I don't like the Mac, but I have one because I'm a tech person. It's what I do. So I already pay for these things just so that I can stay on my A game when it comes to tech. So if I really wanted to, I could easily run these platforms. I could use them if I wanted to. But I prefer Debian. Debian Linux. It's what I use. It's my whole lifeblood. And SteamOS now too. I mean, I don't prefer SteamOS, but I'm going to continue to use it on my desktop, or on my Steam Deck. But my desktops are going to forever be Debian. Because, of course they are. So yeah, that I think that wraps it up for me. I think that's everything. That's a good brain dump. It's been about 45 minutes now, and my videos tend to ramble and be long as it is. So I'm going to cut this short. Maybe I'll cut parts of it so the end of this whole thing will be a little bit shorter. I'm not sure yet. I'll try to get it down to 30 minutes if I can. But that's it for me, guys. I'll probably be doing a Japan retrospective, and I've got a whole bunch of other content planned. So be on the lookout for that. And I guess I'll see you in the next one.